The Wyoming plains stretched out beneath a sky bruised with sunset, the kind of wide-open quiet that could hollow a man from the inside out. Harlan Cade leaned against the post of his front porch, boots planted in the dust, staring at nothing in particular. The air smelled of rain, though the clouds drifting in from the west carried more thunder than promise. The cows were penned, the woodpile was stacked, and still there was no peace in his bones. 5 years he lived this way, just him and the wind, and the ghost of a woman who'd left her mark on every square inch of this place. The chair across from him sat empty like it always did, and sometimes he caught himself talking to it anyway. He sipped at coffee gone cold and let the day slip toward darkness. That was when he heard it. The faint creak of hinges, a sound so out of place in this barren stretch of land it sent a ripple through his chest. The gate. Harlan set the cup down slow and straightened, his eyes narrowing toward the fence line. Sure enough, the gate swung open on its rusty hinge, and there she was. A girl, no, a young woman, stood there with one hand on the splintered wood, her dress hem dark with dust. The brim of her hat shaded her face, but the set of her shoulders was steady despite the way her boots sank into the dirt. "Evening," she called, her voice carrying just enough to reach him. Harlan didn't answer right away. Something tightened in his gut, the old instinct to keep the world and all its troubles at arm's length. "You lost?" he said finally, his voice rough from disuse. "No, sir," she replied. "Not lost. Just looking for work." Harlan frowned. Plenty of ranches close to town. Most of them don't have fences that need mending and cows that need milk in that. "That's so." "Yes, sir. I can do both. And more." The brim of her hat lifted just enough for their eyes to meet. Hers were pale green, bright against skin bronzed by sun and wind. There was something in them, determination, but also hunger and a pride that seemed to be holding her together like thin wire. "Don't need help," Harlan said flatly. "You look like you could." Harlan almost smiled at that. Almost. "Got by fine on my own for 5 years. And you plan to get by another 5? That landed heavier than he'd expected. He didn't answer. "Just a day's work," she pressed. "If you don't like how I handle things, I'll move on." He wanted to send her on her way, to close the gate and retreat to the silence he'd built around himself. But there was something in her tone that caught at the edges of his resolve. She wasn't begging, wasn't even pleading, just asking. Thunder rolled low across the plains. The air thickened with the scent of rain and electricity. "Storm's coming," he muttered. "I've ridden through worse." Harlan rubbed at his jaw, feeling the coarse scrape of his beard. He didn't owe her anything, but the thought of her caught in a downpour with nowhere to go settled in his chest like a stone. "You can sleep in the barn," he said. "There's hay and a blanket out there. Tomorrow we'll see." Her lips curved into the barest ghost of smile. "Much obliged." Harlan watched as she led her tired mare through the gate, boots crunching softly on the dirt. She moved with the easy grace of someone used to long rides and hard work, but he didn't miss the way her hand trembled slightly on the reins. As she disappeared into the barn, Harlan turned back toward the house. He told himself it was only for a night. Inside, the fire crackled weakly in the hearth. He sat in his chair again, staring at the empty one across from him. The girl's voice echoed in his head. "You look like you could." The storm broke not long after, rain lashing against the windows. Harlan didn't light the lantern. He sat in the half-dark, listening to the wind whip through the eaves, wondering if he'd made a mistake. At first light, he woke to the sound of metal on wood, a steady, rhythmic scrape. He pulled on his boots and stepped outside. The storm had passed, leaving the earth damp and smelling of sage. In the pale dawn, he saw her. She was at the milking stool already, skirts gathered neatly around her knees, her hands working with practiced ease. The cows stood docile under her touch, tails flicking lazily. "You're up early," Harlan said. "Best time for milking," she replied without looking up. "You don't waste time." "No, sir. Folks don't have much of it to waste these days." Harlan leaned against the fence post, watching her work. The morning light caught her hair where it slipped loose from her braid, and for a moment he was struck by the quiet beauty of it. Simple, unadorned, like the plains themselves. "What's your name?" he asked. Etta Rose McKinley. "Where you from?" "Everywhere and nowhere." She glanced up then, and he saw something flicker in her eyes. Grief, maybe, or fear, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "You running from something?" "Ain't we all?" Harlan didn't press. He knew better than most how heavy some stories could sit in a person's chest. "I'll be fixing fence today," he said. "If you're staying, you can help." "Yes, sir." "Stop calling me sir. What should I call you then?" "Harlan." Her lips curved again, not quite a smile, but close. "All right, Harlan." They worked side by side that morning, the silence between them easy, not yet heavy. The sun rose higher, burning away the damp until the air shimmered with heat. Harlan noticed the calluses on her hands, the efficiency of her movements. She wasn't afraid of work. That much was clear. But there was a fragility in her, too, like a bird resting only long enough to catch its breath before taking flight again. As they hauled a new rail into place, Etta paused, her fingers brushing a splinter. "Why'd you take me in?" she asked softly. "Didn't want to see you out in the storm." "Kindness don't come free out here." "Didn't say it did," Harlan replied. Their eyes met over the fence post, and something unspoken passed between them. A recognition, maybe, of two people carrying wounds too deep for words. That evening, as the sun bled out over the horizon, Harlan watched her from the porch. She sat on the barn steps, braiding her hair, her silhouette framed against the golden light. For 5 years, he'd sworn off women, sworn off hope. But now, with this stranger at his gate and a calm settling over the ranch he hadn't felt in years, he wondered if his resolve was as strong as he thought. He didn't notice Seth Drummond ride up until man was nearly at the fence. Seth tipped his hat, his expression sharp. "Heard you've got company, Cade. Folks in town are talking. Let 'em talk. Don't say I didn't warn you. Trouble follows a girl like that." Harlan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Seth turned his horse and rode off, the sound of hooves fading into the dusk. Harlan looked back toward the barn. Etta had stopped braiding, her hand still in her lap, her head tilted slightly, as though she'd heard every word. The mornings came earlier now, as though the sun itself was impatient to see what would unfold on Harlan Cade's ranch. The air was crisp but not biting, and the smell of damp sagebrush clung to grass like a memory that refused to lift. Etta Rose was already up, her braids swinging low down her back as she worked the milking stool. The cows shifted lazily beneath her touch, their soft grunts blending with the creak of the old barn rafters. Harlan leaned against the doorframe, arms folded across his chest, watching her without announcing himself. She was quick, efficient. No wasted movement, no hesitation. In another life, Harlan might have smiled at that, but something about the way her shoulders tensed at every stray noise kept him quiet. "You're up early," he said finally. "Don't like to lose the light," she replied, not turning. "You sing sometimes when you work." Her hands paused mid-motion. "Didn't think anyone was listening." "I wasn't, not at first." Etta gave a small shrug and went back to her task. "Old habit. Helps keep my thoughts from wandering places they shouldn't." Harlan stepped closer, the boards creaking under his boots. "Where do they wander?" She looked up then, her green eyes brighter in the pale dawn. "Nowhere worth mentioning." He let the question hang and shifted his gaze to the fields beyond. It wasn't his place to pry. Lord knew he didn't care for it when others tried. By mid-morning, they were out mending the south fence. The winter storms had left sections warped and splintered, wires sagging where nails had rusted through. They worked in silence for a time, passing tools back and forth, each movement strangely in sync, as though some unspoken rhythm had grown between them overnight. "You've got steady hands," Harlan said. "Learn from my pa said a weak fence lets in wolves and worse." "You listen to him?" "Every word." Her voice softened. "He's been gone 4 years now." Harlan glanced over at her, catching the faint tremor in her fingers as she twisted wire taut. "Sorry." "Don't be. Folks die. It's the living that have to figure out what to do next." He recognized the edge in her tone, the armor people wore when they didn't want pity. He'd worn it himself once. "Fair enough," he said. By noon, they'd finished 2 rails and shared bread and beans under the shade of a cottonwood. The quiet between them had softened, less like a wall and more like an easy pause in conversation. "You plan on staying long?" Harlan asked, trying to sound casual. "Depends," Etta said, tearing a piece of bread. "On what?" "On whether I'm welcome." He met her eyes then, surprised by the directness in them. There was no coquetry, no testing, just a woman asking a question that seemed to matter more than she wanted him to see. "Never said you weren't," he replied. "Never said I was either." A crow cawed in the distance, and Harlan shifted his boots in the dirt. "Stay as long as you like. Work's honest, and you got the hand for it." She nodded once. "That'll do." But later, in town, he felt the ripple of her presence long before he saw it. Seth Drummond stood near the general store, hat tilted low, eyes sharp as flint. "Heard you got a girl help out at the ranch," Seth said, spitting tobacco into the dust. "Not your concern," Harlan replied, keeping his voice level. "Folks'll talk, Cade. You know how they get. Don't think a man like you wants that kind of trouble. She's working. That's all. Working her way into your house or your bed." Harlan's jaw flexed, and for a moment he thought about decking Seth right there on the boardwalk. Instead, he said evenly, "You talk like that again, you'll regret it." Seth snorted but didn't press further. As Harlan loaded his supplies, he felt the weight of eyes on his back. When he returned to the ranch, Etta was kneeling in the garden, dirt on her hands as she coaxed new shoots from the earth. "Town's talking," Harlan said. "Let him," she replied without looking up. "Don't bother you?" "Course it does." She stood, brushing soil from her palms. "But I've learned folks will find something to whisper about no matter where you go. That why you left wherever you came from." She hesitated, then nodded. "A man thought I owed him my life for Savant once. When I said no, he didn't take kindly. Word spread faster than truth ever could." Harlan exhaled slowly. "I know what that's like." Etta tilted her head. "Do you?" "Wife ran off with a ranch hand. Neighbors didn't waste time talking sides." Etta's mouth softened at the edges. "Guess we're both running from something. Maybe we've been running long enough." That evening, as the sky burned orange and the cows settled quiet in the pasture, Etta brought out her father's old fiddle and began to play. Harlan sat on the porch steps, boots dusty, hands folded in his lap, listening. The music wasn't polished. There were hesitations, slips in tempo, but it carried a sweetness that wrapped around him like summer wind. He realized then how long it had been since his house felt like more than wood and nails. "You play well," he said when she paused. "Pa taught me," she murmured. "Said music keeps the heart soft when the world tries to harden it." "You believe that?" "I want to." They fell quiet again, the only sound the creak of the porch boards beneath them and the distant cry of a coyote. "I'll ride out to the north pasture tomorrow," Harlan said. "Fence needs check-in. You can stay here if you like." "Or I could ride with you," Etta suggested, surprising them both. He didn't answer right away, but when he met her gaze, something unspoken passed between them. "All right," he said. The next morning, they set out together under a sky wide and unbroken. For the first time in years, Harlan felt the stirrings of something he couldn't name. Something quiet but insistent, like spring thawing the edges of long frozen ground. But as they rode along the ridge, a flicker of movement caught his eye below. 2 men on horseback lingered near his property line, their posture too still, too deliberate. Etta followed his gaze, her face paling. "I know that horse," she whispered. Harlan's hand tightened on the reins. "Someone from before?" She nodded, her voice barely audible. "Jed Wilkes. I told you. He don't let go easy." Harlan's jaw set. "Let's head back. Sun's dropping fast." As they turned for the ranch, he felt it, the weight of eyes tracking them from below. The slow thaw between them wasn't over yet, but neither was the winter. The wind had shifted by nightfall, carrying with it the sharp scent of sage and a heaviness that settled over the ranch like a warning. Harlan Cade stood on the porch with his rifle across his lap, boots planted wide, eyes fixed on the far edge of his property where the land dissolved into shadow. Inside the barn, Etta Rose McKinley sat cross-legged on a pile of hay, her arms wrapped tight around her knees. The lantern beside her cast a soft, trembling light, and in its glow her face seemed older than her years, etched with the kind of fear she tried hard not to show. "They won't come tonight," she murmured to herself, as if saying it aloud could make it true. But she knew Jed Wilkes, knew the hunger in his eyes and the way he carried grudges like sacred scripture. The creak of boots on wood pulled her head up. Harlan stood in the doorway, his silhouette broad and steady against the flickering light. "You need to rest," he said quietly. "I can't. You'll be no good to yourself or me if you're dead on your feet come morning." Etta shook her head. "You don't understand. Jed, he's not the sort to wait for daylight." Harlan stepped into the barn, the lantern light catching in his eyes. They were pale and hard as river stones, but beneath that, something flickered, an ember she hadn't seen before. "I do understand," he said. "I've met his kind before. Men who take what they want because the world's too slow to stop them. But I aim to stop this one." Etta's lips parted as though to protest, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she watched as he knelt before her and laid a hand gently on her shoulder. "I told you once this land's mine. That means no man walks on it uninvited. Not him, not anyone." Something warm and sharp broke loose in her chest. She didn't trust herself to speak, so she only nodded. By midnight, the ranch had gone still. The cows shifted uneasily in the pens, their low moans carrying across the yard. The moon rode high behind a curtain of clouds, spilling silvery light in ragged streaks. Harlan sat by the front window, rifle ready, every muscle taut as a coiled rope. He'd been waiting for years, though he hadn't known it until now. Not just for trouble like this, but for a reason to fight again. The first sound came soft, almost delicate, the crunch of a hoof in loose gravel. Harlan's breath slowed. Two shapes emerged from the tree line, then a third. Horses. Riders. Etta appeared at his side, barefoot and pale in the dim light. "It's him," she whispered. "Go to the back room. Stay down. I'm not hiding. This isn't bravery, girl. It's survival." She stared at him a long moment, then nodded, but instead of retreating, she picked up the loaded pistol he'd set on the table and checked the chamber with hands that barely trembled. Harlan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Outside, a voice carried on the wind, mocking and thick with whiskey. "Evening, Cade. You got something belongs to me. Send her out nice, and maybe we won't burn your place to the ground." Harlan stepped onto the porch, his boots creaking loud in the silence. "She doesn't belong to you, Wilkes. Never did." A low chuckle. "That ain't for you to decide. She's under my roof. That's all there is to decide." There was a pause, then the sharp sound of a pistol cocking. "You always were a stubborn bastard. You're about to find out how stubborn." The night seemed to hold its breath. Then a gunshot rang out, splitting the stillness. The bullet buried itself in the porch post inches from Harlan's shoulder. He didn't flinch. "Last chance, Cade," Wilkes shouted. Harlan raised his rifle and fired. The shot cracked like thunder, and one of the horses screamed as its rider toppled into the dirt. Chaos erupted. Wilkes's remaining man charged forward, firing wildly. Splinters flew as bullets tore through the porch railing. Harlan dropped to one knee, fired again, and saw the man spin backward off his horse. Only Wilkes remained now, his face a pale mask in the moonlight. "You think you're a hero, Cade," he snarled. "You're just another fool protecting what ain't yours." Harlan's voice was steady as stone. "This isn't about her. It's about draw a line." Wilkes roared and spurred his horse forward. Harlan fired, but the shot went wide. The horse reared as Wilkes leapt from the saddle, landing hard in the dirt with his pistol raised. The two men collided near the porch steps. The gun went skittering into the shadows as fists struck flesh, the sound wet and sharp in the night air. Etta stood frozen in the doorway, the pistol clutched tight in her hands. "Shoot him!" Harlan shouted as Wilkes drove a knee into his ribs. She raised the pistol, her breath coming ragged, but the memory of Wilkes's threats, his hands, his laughter, they all crashed over her like cold water. "Do it, Etta." Her finger hesitated on the trigger. Wilkes turned toward her with a sneer. You ain't got it in you, girl. The sneer died as a single shot rang out. Wilkes stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. His pistol fell with a soft thud into the dirt. You were wrong, Etta said, her voice shaking. Harlan shoved Wilkes to the ground and stood, breathing hard. Get on your horse and don't look back, he growled. If I see you on this land again, it'll be the last time. Wilkes didn't argue. He scrambled onto his horse and fled into the dark, the sound of hooves fading fast. Silence returned slowly, like a held breath released. Harlan turned to Etta. She was trembling now, the pistol hanging loose in her grip. He stepped forward, taking it gently from her hands. It's over, he said. She looked up at him, her eyes glassy. I didn't think I could do it. You didn't have to, but you did anyway. Harlan's hand brushed hers, warm and rough, and for a moment neither of them moved. As dawn broke over the horizon, the light painted the ranch in soft gold. The porch rail was splintered, the dirt stained dark where Wilkes had fallen, but the air felt different now, lighter, as though the long night had taken something heavy with it when it left. Etta stood beside Harlan, her braid undone, the wind tugging loose strands across her face. Maybe I should go, she said quietly. You've had enough trouble on my account. Stay, Harlan said. The word was simple, unpolished, but it carried a weight she felt deep in her chest. She turned to him, her green eyes searching. You sure? For the first time in a long while, he said, I'm sure of something. Etta smiled then, small and soft, and the sight of it settled into him like a promise. The wind shifted again, warm now, carrying the scent of new grass. For 5 years, Harlan Cade had lived as though his heart were a barren field. But standing there with Etta Rose McKinley, he began to wonder if spring hadn't finally come.